Hello, I'm Dan Jones. I'm here tonight to welcome you to a very special event. It's called the Upfront Town Hall Challenge, and it's a conversation with the candidates for governor. We're also happy to tell you that the broadcast is being seen all across the state tonight. In just a moment, I'll join the audience at the Marquette University Law School and ask the candidates a few questions from our online viewers. Next week, we'll be here again with the candidates for U.S. Senate. But now it's time to get started. Thank you so much for joining us. On behalf of Milwaukee Public TV, we're proud to sponsor this conversation between the candidates and the people of Wisconsin.
The following is a special presentation of WISN 12 in association with Milwaukee Public Television, channels 10 and 36, and WisPolitics.com. Wisconsin's future is on the line in the race for governor. Your vote on November 2nd will decide who leads our state. Tonight, Democratic candidate Tom Barrett and Republican candidate Scott Walker join Mike Gousha for a conversation with Wisconsin. They'll take questions from citizen groups in Green Bay, La Crosse, Madison, Eau Claire, Wausau, and Milwaukee. It's all part of the Upfront Town Hall Challenge. Now, from Eckstein Hall, the new home of Marquette University Law School in Milwaukee. Tonight's moderator, 12 News Upfront anchor, Mike Gousha.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Eckstein Hall at Marquette University Law School. I'm Mike Gousha. I'm a journalist who works here at the law school exploring public policy issues. I'm also the host of the statewide public affairs television program, Upfront. This is the second in our series of conversations with the candidates for statewide office. In August, we hosted the Republican candidates in the gubernatorial primary. Tonight, it's the party nominees in the race for governor. With me at the table tonight are Democratic candidate Tom Barrett, the mayor of Milwaukee, and the Republican candidate Scott Walker, the Milwaukee County Executive. Gentlemen, thanks to both of you for being with us.
Great to be here, Mike. Good to be here.
A few words about the format before we get started. I'll be asking the candidates questions for roughly the first 15 minutes or so in a free-flowing conversation. And then we'll begin taking questions from citizen groups around the state. Now, these citizens, if you're wondering, were recruited based on their participation in their local communities. We found them by reading letters to the editor, minutes of school board, township, and city council meetings. They are Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and liberals, independents. Their assignment was to represent Wisconsin and come up with several questions they want answered, questions that they all agreed on. We want to thank them for their time and participation in advance. In fact, some of them are in our audience tonight here in Milwaukee. 12 News anchor Kathy Michaelby is here with a group of citizens from southeastern Wisconsin who have questions for the candidates. And Dan Jones from Milwaukee Public Television, channels 10 and 36, is fielding questions from our internet viewers via WisPolitics.com, mptv.org, and WISN.com. Now the rules, and they're pretty simple. This is a conversation. The viewers tell us they want to hear more than talking points, more than sound bites or slogans. We've got 90 minutes tonight, but the time will go by quickly, so we're asking the candidates to answer questions as directly and concisely as possible. At times, I may jump in to follow up or simply move on. The candidates can also speak directly to each other, although again, I'll be playing the role of traffic cop, start, stop, that kind of thing. Our goal is to have the candidates address the issues the citizen groups raise and hear more about how they would tackle some of the state's toughest challenges. There are no opening statements tonight, but each candidate will have a 1-minute closing statement, and we ask the audience to please refrain from any applause. We tossed a coin for the order of questioning tonight, and Mr. Barrett will go first. And I thought this would be an appropriate place for this question, the college campus. We're here, and there are a number of students in this room with us tonight, and there are young people around the state watching too. So I'd like you to speak directly to the young folks. And the question is, why should they plan a future in Wisconsin? Why shouldn't they go somewhere where the temperatures are warmer, the taxes are lower, and the unemployment opportunities are greater?
Well, Mike, first of all, thank you for having me tonight. Yeah. And I can't do much about the weather, so I'm going to take a pass on that. But I think for my kids, and I'll just speak of my kids, I want my 4 kids to grow up here. I want them to get a good education. I want them to have jobs where they can support their families. And not surprisingly, I want them to take care of me when I get old. Because I think that that's what most people in the state want. They want their kids to stay here. And the reason for them to stay here is there will be opportunities, and there are opportunities. I think we all recognize that this is a tough time economically right now. But my message for the young people is, look, we're going to get through this. We've got through this before. There have been difficult times for America. There have been difficult times for Wisconsin, but we're going to battle through it. But one of my major concerns, and this is, I'm going to cut right to the chase here, is to the priorities. Education is a big priority in the state, and there's a lot of young people here. There's a lot of young people in the state that are concerned about education. And right now we have a $2.7 billion structural deficit. The next governor is going to inherit that $2.7 billion structural deficit. That means it is going to be difficult for either Scott or me to fund education. And education is the key to success. I think we all recognize that. Scott's talked a lot about tax cuts that are not aimed at the middle class or at working people, of $1.8 billion. And my concern is if he's successful in getting those tax cuts through, it will be harder for the young people to get education. And the big challenge we have right now, and all you have to do is look at Minnesota. Minnesota has about a $4,000 to $5,000 per capita difference with us in that state. Part of that is because 32% of its residents have a college degree. Here, only 26% do. So we have to make sure that the young people can have an education so they can support their families.
Your message to the young folks watching tonight.
Yeah, well, much like the mayor, I have two sons. In fact, one who's playing football in just a few minutes. So hopefully after this debate, like the last debate, I'll get a chance to go over there and see the second half of Matthew at Wauwatosa East High School. But I've got a junior and a sophomore, so I'm concerned about not only their education now, but the cost and effectiveness of staying here in the state of Wisconsin. I want them to get an education here in Wisconsin. I ultimately want them to stay. I've been all around this campus, was just over, literally 2 days ago over at UW Stout. I've been to nearly every campus around the state. And oftentimes when I talk to young people, like you're talking about, I ask for a show of hands. I say, how many are seniors? Okay, now how many tell me, how many of you have a job lined up? And unfortunately, the hands go down, almost all of them. Stout has a few more lined up because they've got a pretty good percentage rate, about 97% of placing people in the jobs, but nearly every other campus, most of the juniors and seniors there don't see jobs yet on the horizon. I tell them that's why you need to pay attention to the race for governor. It's not just about tuition or the drinking age or any other issues that oftentimes we talk about on college campuses. It's ultimately about what governor is going to put us in a position to have more jobs when they're out of college a few years down the road. Now the last 8 years, I said the policies that Jim Doyle's put in place has taken us down the wrong path. And unfortunately, you know, Tom Barrett, the mayor of Milwaukee, is talking about essentially the same policies that have failed us the last 8 years under Jim Doyle. Now, I think that's really the fundamental difference here. Now, we've got a great state. We've got great employers. We've got a great workforce. We've got tremendous natural resources. We've got plenty of reasons. In fact, most of the businesses I talked to, I just had a brown bag lunch yesterday in Eau Claire like I do all over the state. And for most of the businesses, the good news out there is while people are hurting, a lot of businesses are telling me they're ready to put people to work, but they're afraid of what the government's going to do to them next. You get government out of the way, I am convinced that our plan to help create 250,000 jobs will be kicked off right away once we send that clear message. And that's what the young people in college today need. They need the hope that there's actually going to be a job a year or two down the road when they get out of their college.
So I hear both of you saying that you think you're the guy who can get us there. You're the guy who's going to turn things around.
Absolutely.
Well, yeah, and that's understandable. Yeah. But let me ask each a question, and it's based on events that have been in the news recently. And I'll go back to you, Mayor Barrett. The U.S. Census Bureau comes out with a report that says Milwaukee is the fourth poorest big city in America after Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo. You want to be the guy who's going to lead us into this era of prosperity. Should that not be a red flag for voters around the state? Should they not look at Milwaukee's situation and say, gee, I'm not sure?
Well, we're both from Milwaukee. There's no question about that. And I've tackled this issue from the day I became the mayor of the city. I started out by working with Republicans, Democrats, suburbanites to create the M7, the Milwaukee 7, to create, retain, and attract jobs. Scott's reaction to that was it was like putting lipstick on a pig. I think that part of the job of the mayor or the county executive or the governor is to be the #1 salesman, the #1 cheerleader, the #1 ambassador for their area. And I was shocked when he said that because I thought we're supposed to be promoting this area. But I did more than that. I worked and created a summer jobs program. And I did that because I think we as adults have a moral obligation to create hope in the lives of young people. And I put thousands of kids to work in this city. I put reading programs into the libraries because I know that the racial achievement gap grows over the summer months. I've worked on a fatherhood initiative so fathers would be more involved in their kids' lives. I've been very active, the city's been very active through Bevan Baker with a teenage pregnancy program to avoid teenage pregnancies. We haven't avoided these issues, we've tried to tackle them. But I look at the county. You can't forget that Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, is the largest entity in Milwaukee County. And what has the county done? It's cut transportation. So it's made it harder for low-income people to get to jobs. It's really decimated its system for income maintenance to the point that the state had to take it over. I need a partner, and I don't feel like I've had a partner, to be honest with you.
Well, let me pick up on that point because there's a question for each of you here.
Sure.
You're lucky enough to get that. You know, the question, I guess, for the county is, Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel reported this week that the Greater Milwaukee Committee, a longtime civic institution in this area, is going to issue a report after the November election. And the report is going to say that Milwaukee County is in dire financial straits. In fact, I'm going to quote from it. It says, if we don't make changes today, the future looks grim. Parks will close, bus routes will end, families in distress will not get the help they need. Our Milwaukee will grow smaller and smaller as people and companies leave. I asked him if the poverty statistics aren't a red flag. The same question could be put to you. If I'm a voter in outstate Wisconsin, why should I vote for you, given the condition of Milwaukee County?
Because that's the problem facing government today. That report came out of not something they picked up on their own, it's something I actually initiated years ago. We did the reality tour all around this community, got the attention of the Greater Milwaukee Committee, actually got the attention of the governor of the state of Wisconsin to hone in on this issue. We pointed out that public sector wages and benefits are growing out of control. In fact, public sector employees, whether it's at the city of Milwaukee, where they have the 10th highest unfunded liability of any municipal public pension system in the country, whether it's the Milwaukee Public School System and the $2 billion unfunded liability, or the state of Wisconsin, which has financial troubles beyond belief out there. In every case, one of the key components is public sector employees have been the untouchables. We can no longer have a society where the public employees are the haves and the people who foot the bill, the taxpayers, are the have-nots. That's what I've initiated. That's what I called out for years ago.
Why hasn't it happened?
What has? If you look at the changes we've made right now, don't look at the ads, the attack ads, or all the other political pundits out there. Look at the national bond rating agencies. Those are essentially the credit rating agencies for public employees, or for public institutions, like the city, like the county, like the state. Since I've been in office, the bond rating that was down before has actually been stabilized, improved, even while the states went down. We've cut our outstanding debt. In fact, our general obligation debt will be down 30% in 2012 from where it was when I first took office. The size of the government workforce is down 25%. Last year, when the state of Wisconsin had a record deficit, I actually had a surplus. We've taken on those challenges. What I've said is, what I'm saying in the summary of that report that came out, that's all I've seen is the summary. What they're saying is exactly what I've said for years. You cannot tackle the challenges of the city, the county, the state, the schools without tackling the public sector employee benefits out there.
You're anxious to weigh in.
Well, he's right. You've got to tackle the problems, and he's been playing flag football. Because I think the people of the state have to understand that Scott did come in, right, in the mantle of reform on the pension crisis. We all agree on that. I think people in the state would be shocked to know, just in the last 2 months, we've had employees who have retired from the county with a pension, a yearly pension of $60,000, $65,000. Now that's a healthy pension. But they've also gotten a one-time payout of $1 million.
But that was established before he was county
But
executive.
yes, but he came in and said he was going to reform it. But that's not the only part of it. That's point one. If he said he was going to reform it, and he says he's a reformer, where's the reform? But there's another point. Since 2001, every new City of Milwaukee employee has paid towards their pension. Scott came on the mantle of reform. Virtually no county employees at this point paid toward their pension. Very, very few. Not only did we have it since 2001, but in 2009, in my budget, for this year's budget, they're going to be paying even more. So his rhetoric is phenomenally good. But this is tackle football, not tag football. The third point goes to the amount that he lowballed his own pension system. In 2005, his actuaries said put in a certain amount, he lowballed it. 2006, he lowballed it. 2007, he lowballed it. 2008, he lowballed it. Got to 2009, he went out and borrowed $400 million. And part of that goes because he did not put in the amount that his own pension board said he should put in. To me, that's kicking the can down the road and posing for the holy pictures.
Let me give you a chance to respond to that. There's a lot there.
Sure, I made a list out there because I can go through and refute every single one of them. It's why on many of these issues, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, the state's largest newspaper, and some of the same attacks gave his ad a pants on fire lie rating for falsifying many of the same issues out there. You go down the list, we inherited an incredible pension challenge. We tackled it. We immediately reformed the pension board, replaced the members, moved that forward. We capped off those benefits. Now, I'm not a lawyer. You're a lawyer. We're here in the law school. You know you can't take away vested benefits. So we capped those off From that point forward, nobody else can take those. The only reason they talk about rearranging the finances of the county is so that there are other ways you could get back on that, but legally there is no way to do that. Instead, we capped that off, and because of what we inherited, we didn't borrow for a new debt. We had the unfunded liability. What we did was use a responsible reform tool that even the comptroller from the city of Milwaukee said was a good idea. The governor's task force, the GMC, and others pointed out was the right thing to do, and that was use pension obligation bonds, not to issue new debt, but to take the debt that was already there, much like homeowners around the state do with refinancing their homes, and actually save the taxpayers $237 million over 25 years. You know, now, last year, I made my full pension contribution for 2010, fully funded it, $49 million. The city of Milwaukee had a $49 million pension contribution. How did they pay for it? They raised taxes and fees by $21 million, raising taxes and fees, exactly what Jim Doyle has done throughout his tenure as governor. That's exactly why we're in trouble when it comes to jobs.
30 seconds, and we're going to move on.
Well, City of Milwaukee, fully funded, no debt. Milwaukee County pension, not fully funded, $400 million debt. Pretty clear. But Mike, pretty clear what the difference is.
But Mike, don't take my word for it. Look at the national bond rating agencies. They're the people that do the credit checks in the city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, the state of Wisconsin. They've stabilized our bond rating, even while Dane County had a drop, even while the city or the state of Wisconsin had a drop.
I'll take
our
some
bond rating,
cash, not charge
our
cash.
Our bond rating is stable. If we were bad about that, if that's not what I said, they would have downgraded us.
Let me move on here, because people out there want to know what you're going to do now. And both of you have issued plans that you say would lead to the creation of jobs in the state, tens of thousands of jobs, actually. Make the case here. The big difference in your plans, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, the big difference here is you believe in targeted tax breaks, targeted tax incentives for companies that are going to create jobs in the state. You think we need to lower taxes for small businesses. You also want to repeal taxes on some of the bigger corporations in the state and on higher earning Wisconsinites. Make the case why your approach is better for this moment in time. I'll begin with you, Mayor Barrett.
Well, I'd love to see lower taxes on small businesses too, but we have to deal in reality here. And the reality is that the next governor is going to have a $2.7 billion structural deficit. He wants to add $1.8 billion to that structural deficit. So if you care about education, if you care about public safety, if you care about property taxes, hold on to your hat. And his argument is going to be, well, that's going to stimulate the economy. Well, this isn't the federal government. It's a 2-year budget. It's a 2-year budget. So by math, he's going to have to decimate education and public safety. I'm not going to do that. To me, this is about values. But I do think that we can have tax cuts that are tied to job creation. That's what we did with Republic. That's how we got 1,600 jobs in the state. But we did it by being positive, aggressive, and proactive. Scott, again, he stood by the sidelines. In 2008, when this economy was imploding, he disbanded his Office of Economic Development while the economy was imploding.
Make the case. Why is your approach better at this moment in time?
Well, and to answer your question on that one, the bottom line is you need to get government out of the way. I talk to employers all the time, from one end of the state to the other, that say what's killing them is government's in the way. We've got a simple plan. You know, the mayor's got a 67-page plan. It's filled with $1.1 billion of more government spending. That's the kind of logic that's got us in trouble over the past 8 years. It is. It's just filled with that. 35 pages or more spending, 10 pages or more government regulation. More big government is not the answer. We've got a simple but comprehensive plan to get the state working. It's cutting taxes across the board. We start out on day one with lowering taxes on small businesses, but our overall plan is to cut taxes on individuals, employers, on property, even on retirement income over time. It's cutting regulations, it's cutting litigation, it's improving education in this state, which, you know, the mayor can say that all he wants, but we have not made that proposal. And the simple fact is, the same detractors, the same people attacking us would point that out about the county budget, yet we maintain our core services for people with disabilities, for seniors in our community, for our parks, for our transportation system, and we still cut taxes because we knew in these tough economic times to get the economy going again, we needed to put more money back in the hands of the people. The other quick part about that, because he brought it up before, the M7, well, let's talk about that. The M7, which I'm a member of, the founding member of the M7 believes so much in the plan I just articulated, he's actually supporting my campaign for governor. That's because the business leaders of this community and this state, big and small, understand the answer is not more of the same we've had for the last 8 years. It's getting government out of the way.
30 seconds each, and then we'll move on again.
Well, again, there's obviously a difference here. And Scott, to me, this is about trust. This is a whole issue of trust. Scott does a good job in going to every group he meets and says, I will cut your taxes. He does it with the business people. He does it with the highway construction. He does it with the hospitals. I can agree with everybody, too. I think the people in this state want a straight shooter. I'm not going to go and tell everybody I'm going to cut their taxes. Because if you're doing that, you're decimating education. And I'm going to go back to that over and over again. I'm not going to tell everybody just because I want to get elected. I'm not going to say or do anything just to get elected. Scott has made these promises to every group. I follow him around. Oh, Scott told us he's going to cut our taxes. Oh, Scott told us he's going to cut our taxes. You just can't, you got to, at some point.
And the mayor, the difference is, I've got a track record to prove it. You can make promises when you deliver on your promises.
Well, I think we should talk about that.
8 years ago, I said I would not raise the property tax levy from the previous year. I've done that every consistent budget I've been in office. For the last 6 years, as the mayor of Milwaukee, you've raised the property tax levy every year I've been in office, until this year. A month and a half before the election, for the first time, after ridiculing me last year and saying anybody cannot raise the property tax levy, you didn't do it 6 times in a row, but now, right before an election, you've done it. Miracle of miracles, you had a conversion. The bottom line is I can make that promise because I've done it in the toughest place in the state repeatedly.
This got to be fast.
Well, I think we should spend a little time on this one because this is his core argument. His core argument, and this is important, his executive budget in 2003, not the county board's budget, his executive budget in 2003, if you compare it to his executive budget this year, this is when we're standing bare naked. This is not blaming that terrible county board or blaming the county. This is your executive budget, my executive budget. Your executive budget in 2010 has levied $39 million higher than 2003. Did you propose that?
Look at the promise I made.
Did you propose that?
Look at the promise. If
Did
you
you
want to make an
propose
answer,
it?
I'll answer it.
Yeah.
Look at the promise I made in 2002. It was to not raise the property tax levy from the previous year. I've kept that promise every year. Now compare that. When you first ran for mayor, you said you were not going to allow any sewage to go into Lake Michigan. Not a bit of it. You didn't qualify it. You didn't say from one year to the next you said you wouldn't allow any. 8 billion gallons has gone to Lake Michigan. Let's look at the promises. Let the voters look at the promises. Every promise I've made has been kept. Every single one.
I want to bring in the stations from around the state, the affiliates, the upfront
Let the
affiliates.
record show he didn't answer the question.
We're going to...
Well, but you asked what the promise was. The promise was I wouldn't raise it from the previous year.
Law students get that, the record shows.
Tammy Elliott is at WFRV TV in Green Bay tonight with our citizen group there. And we're going to begin our questions. And Tammy, we'll start with one that affects a lot of people. 772,000 people in this state on Badger Care, some form of Badger Care. Tammy, go ahead.
And we know health care is one of the state's fastest rising costs for our taxpayers. So we would like the candidates, our group has been asking specifically, what is your plan for Badger Care? As you said, Mike, a lot of people on it. Right now, there are more than 50,000 on a waiting list. They're uninsured. This is a state health care program paid for by state and federal funds. And our understanding, time limits are not allowed in this program under federal rules. So with our question, I have Vicki Hunt of Green Bay.
Hi. Would you scale back any Badger Care Plus programs? And how will you budget for the ever-growing state human services programs?
Vicki, thanks for your question. Mayor Barrett, we begin with you.
Well, I'm very proud to have been one of the people who worked hard on the creation of Badger Care here in the state of Wisconsin. On a bipartisan basis, I worked with Governor Tommy Thompson to get those waivers approved. And it's my intent to do everything I can to preserve Badger Care in its current form. I think it's important, and I think people need to understand what this program is. This is a program that allows people to get off welfare and to work. We had a problem where too many people found that they had health problems, but their pay was low. And it made more sense for them economically to not work. This changes that. This is a pro-work program. So I want this to be as strong a program as I can. Scott, at this very table during the last debate, said he would put time limits on the program because he had been saying that throughout the entire campaign up to that point. Apparently someone called him the next day and said you couldn't, but his intent was to put time limits on. I don't want to put time limits on this program because I think if you do that, then people are going to be forced off the rolls and forced out of jobs. I think it's important for people to have health care. And I think it's very, very important that we do everything we can to make sure that people keep working. So I'm not going to do it. Scott's talked about cutting hundreds of thousands of people off this roll. He is going to have to cut hundreds of thousands of people off the rolls of this if he continues to push for a tax cut for the wealthiest people in the state. That's a trade-off.
You're okay with the size of the program?
I'm okay with the, well, again, I have not made any promises to any group, contrary to Scott's style. I haven't made any promises because I'm dead serious about solving this $2.7 billion structural deficit.
You can address Vicky's question, please.
Yeah, I voted for Badger Care. I support Badger Care. I was in the legislature when it was created, and I support it. So moving from that point forward, I want to make it more efficient and more effective, much like we did with family care in my community. Literally, about a decade ago, before I came into office, there was about 2,500 people on a waiting list for long-term care services in our county. 2 months after we came into office, we eliminated that waiting list, and today there's about 6,400 seniors in our community who aren't on the waiting list who get long-term care services. Now, we don't run Badger Care directly, the state does, but that's something we've done on the county level I think we can emulate. Now, the one thing that is partially true is I did talk about term limits, but not for Badger Care specifically. What I qualified is there's a certain fraction of people who are in Badger Care who are part of W-2. When Tommy Thompson created W-2, he had term limits, time limits in there. The idea being you had a safety net as people went from welfare into the workforce. There'd be a safety net to support them with child care and medical assistance as they moved along the way, but it wouldn't become a permanent entitlement. I think, and those term limits or time limits have gone away under Jim Doyle's tenure. I think we have to have some time limits as people move from welfare into the workforce. But what I want to do is reduce the number of people on the rolls when it comes to public assistance by putting them onto the rolls of more jobs. It's all part of our jobs component out there. The more people we get who are working, who have coverage, the more money we have left for the truly needy people, families that are needy, individuals with developmental and physical disabilities. That's where the support of Badger Care should be.
Okay, I just want to check in with Tammy and Vicky back there to see if they're getting the information they want. Tammy, go ahead.
We understand your viewpoints on those from both, but how will you fund this? Because it's growing, it's continuing to grow.
How will you fund it is the question.
Where will you find the money?
Again, my response is we cannot afford the $1.8 billion tax cuts that Scott Walker is talking about right now. And if we do have those tax cuts, then you're going to see this program ripped apart as well. And he talks about the time limits. I want that clerk at Walmart to continue working. She doesn't get health insurance. And just as Scott and his running mate have great state insurance, I don't want that woman who works behind the counter at Walmart have to quit her job because her kid is sick.
How do you fund it?
Well, you make it a priority. I mean, that's essentially what we've done at the county as well. I mean, for the same thing, we actually had a property tax levy cut this year, and yet we still provided, in fact, we added funding for family care. We added funding to add more people with developmental and physical disabilities. We added it to fully cover the 6,400 seniors that we provide care for. If you have priorities, you can still cut taxes in the areas that help stimulate the economy, that help get more people working and provide for the core priorities. We added funding for social services in our county budget. We can do the same thing with the state budget if we focus in on the areas that are the most efficient uses of our resources.
Let me move on to the next question. The two of you have touched on this to some extent already, and this is the severity of the budget deficit facing the state of Wisconsin. And that's where our next question will pick up. We're going to go over to Madison. Greg Jeske at Channel 27 in Madison. Greg, go ahead.
Mike, it is the elephant, or at least one of the elephants in the room tonight as far as this discussion goes. I would like really quickly to point out, though, not all of our group could be here tonight because of some previous commitments, but we had some great discussions, little mini debates of our own on this. And we're wondering about the $2.7 billion budget deficit. And Peggy Wireman of Monona is one of the folks who's talked a lot about that, and I'll ask her a question.
What I would like to know are what are the three specific things that you would cut in the budget in order to alleviate the problem, and what would you hold harmless?
All right, we'll begin with Scott Walker.
Well, certainly when I look at things like public safety, public health, education, those are things that we should protect because those are priorities, much as we've done at the county level as well. I look at specifics. I mean, when we've laid this out all summer, we've talked about specifics, things like asking state workers to do what nearly everybody else in society does, and that's make a contribution to their pension system. 5%, that's the average. That's what we're asking for. That's what we've asked for from the county, for the county board to pass through the last couple of years in our budget as well. We think that's reasonable. We've looked at the fact that right now there are 4,000 positions that are not public safety related in state government today that are unfunded, that are funded but are not filled. They're vacant positions. But the funding is in those state agencies. We'd take that funding out and use it to plug the budget hole. We talked about other changes when it comes to health care for government employees and making changes there to make it more efficient. Those are all things that specifically aren't about cutting services to the public, but about changes we can make to ultimately lower our budget deficit. Do that along with the growth that we need that I've talked about through our plan to create 250,000 jobs, and we can do what successful states have done over the past couple of years, balance the budget and still provide for core services.
Mayor Barrett?
Well, certainly, one of the things that I've proposed, and I have put state government, put Madison on the diet plan that people can find on my website. But we've talked about a wide range of things, including things like allowing state employees and local employees to get into the same purchasing pool so that they can lower the cost of their health care. We've talked about having a sunset review commission. Texas has done this, and for every dollar spent there, they've saved $37. I certainly want to get more money into Medicaid fraud so that we can lower the fraud that we see in programs like that. We've seen news reports about that just this week. And eliminate some constitutional offices like the Secretary of State and the Treasurer. I think we can have some savings there. But I don't want anybody in the state to believe that this is going to be easy. It's going to be difficult. You can't cut $2.7 billion without making some difficult decisions. And that's why I think we got to be honest with you. And we've got to tell you, look, we can't have these tax cuts that benefit the wealthiest people. And I like wealthy people. I've got 4 kids. They're 11, 13, 16, and 18. I'd be the happiest guy in the world if one of my kids would marry one of their kids and support me in the manner to which I would like to be accustomed. But this is about values, and this is about making sure that we're making the right decisions.
Greg Jeske, you want to jump in? Go ahead, sir.
As we talked about this in our group, it just came back again and again that with that big of a deficit, there are going to have to be some major cuts. Of course, there are going to have to be a lot of small things done, but we're looking for the obvious major cuts that are going to have to be made, or that would seem that would have to be made. Peggy, what did you hear there?
Well, I guess what I heard, particularly from Mr. Walker, is that basically what you're going to do is cut state employees. But then which specific programs are you going to cut state employees? For example, the food stamp program is administered through the state, and if those people are cut, then people won't be able to get their food stamps.
County Executive, go ahead.
Yeah, the positions we're talking about are 4,000 positions that are vacant today. They haven't been filled for the past year in this current budget. By next year, they'll have been vacant for 2 years. They're not talking about cutting existing positions. It's talking about positions that don't have bodies in them, but the funding is still in the state budget. I'd take that out. In the same way, though, that we're talking about other things, we're asking employees to make the pension contribution. I'd make that starting on day one. I would do that even before the budget. In fact, I do that in the same way that 8 years ago when I came into office, there was literally, the county executive before me was making more money than the governor of the state of Wisconsin. I said that was wrong, and Tonette and I, since then, have given $370,000 of our salary back. If you're going to lead, you got to set the example. I'm willing to do that. Those are the sorts of tough choices you have to make, but I believe we don't have to push that off on the back of cutting core services. We can do that by being more efficient, more effective, and really having the public sector not be the untouchables anymore, but instead do the same things that employers are doing all across the state and across the country.
You're shaking your head. Go ahead.
But Mike, this is about trust. This is all about trust. Scott Walker came into office 8 years ago, and there are no county employees that contribute to their pension now. Hasn't happened. He talks about savings from unfilled positions. If an unfilled position is there, the money's not spent. It's voodoo economics. You got to be honest with people. You don't save any money if you're not spending any money.
Well, Tom used to serve in the legislature, and you know the fact is the money is in the budget. You take it out of the budget, it goes into balancing the bottom line. That's precisely why you want to take it. If you continue to give that money and leave it in state agencies, they'll use it for other purposes. You got to grab the money and balance the budget. You can say it all you want, you can attack all you want because you're behind, but that doesn't change the fact that those two things, the pension contribution, along with the simple fact that not filling those vacant positions would save about $1 billion alone. There are plenty of other issues out there that would save real money and not have to make those cuts. The other part is when you look at states across the country that have cut their taxes, cut the litigation, cut the regulation burden in their states, those are the states in the past couple of years in these tough economic times that have actually seen not only job growth, they've actually seen revenue go up. Because as you put more people to
give me an example
Texas,
of the state.
Tennessee, the
Texas'
Carolinas.
unemployment rate is higher than Wisconsin's.
No, but they've actually, in the past couple of years, their budgets have actually been stabilizing. You look at Tennessee in particular, the Carolinas, the Dakotas, those are states in each case where they've actually had a lower tax burden, they've eased their regulatory burden, they've eased their litigation burden. They've not only put more people to work. In fact, 2 years ago, Texas actually had more jobs created in 1 year than all 49 states combined. We can emulate many of those same things and still protect our core services. But we don't need to go down the path that Jim Doyle has taken us down the last 8 years, where the answer is always more taxes. That's what happened in the city of Milwaukee. The biggest problem we have here, taxes and fees went up $21 million in this budget under Tom Barrett. We don't need more of that to get this state working again.
And the question lingers out there about whether you raised your tax levy between 2003 and 2010.
Look at last year to this year, it hasn't gone up a penny.
All right, guys, we'll move up to my old stomping grounds, Wausau, Wisconsin. The Northwoods of Wisconsin, Pam Warnke is at WAOW TV with our citizen group up there, and they have a question that deals with the environment. Pam, go ahead.
Mike, our group tonight is a bit smaller than the 15 who came up with these questions originally, but Bill Meyer has a great question that we had some lengthy discussion about. Bill?
Central Wisconsin's ground and surface waters are threatened by conflicting land uses. Sound public policy based on public input is critical. DNR plays a major role. Do you support an independent appointment of Wisconsin DNR Secretary by the Natural Resources Board? Please explain your answers. Thank you.
Mayor Barrett?
I do support, to answer the question directly, I do support that. I do support the independent selection. This is the practice we had for many years. It allows conservationists to be involved. It allows landowners to be involved. I think it's probably democracy at its finest when we have individuals who care about our environment but care about business at the same time. And I think it's important for us to recognize that this isn't the 1970s anymore. And in the 1970s, you had people who were, you were opposed to the environment. If you were in favor of the environment, that meant you were anti-business. If you were in favor of business, that meant you were anti-environment. I reject that, and we've been very successful in Milwaukee to have a sustainability practice where you can have both a good environment and have businesses grow.
County Executive Walker?
I don't. I think you need to hold somebody accountable, and the only way you hold people accountable is if you have an elected official who's responsible for picking a cabinet secretary, accountable for not only providing for clean water, but making sure we protect our natural resources. At the same time, we protect our state's economy. Jim Doyle, more than any governor before him, has politicized the Department of Natural Resources. If we were to shift to a natural resources appointed position, all those appointments still stay on, and they would control the next several years of decisions, even while the members of the state have elected a new governor. Republican or Democrat, it's going to be a new governor. I think the people should be able to directly hold somebody accountable. The only way to do that is through the governor. Now, when you talk about water, and I think that's an important issue in Wausau and anywhere else across the state, I mean, we've got 15,000 inland lakes. That's more than 5,000 more than Minnesota. You know, we want to make sure that our lakes, our rivers, our waterways are protected. That's one of the things I talk about when I talk about our infrastructure plan, not just roads and bridges, but clean water. That's a big difference. The mayor talked about when he ran for mayor of Milwaukee in 2004, he specifically gave a nice big plan, just like the 67-page plan he talks about now. In his plan, it didn't equivocate. It said he will stop the dumping of sewage into Lake Michigan. He even attacked Marvin Pratt, the mayor at that time, in a radio ad that said in 60 days he hasn't done it. 6 years later, 8 billion gallons from the sewage district, of which he appoints 7 to 11 commissioners on, has dumped more than 8 billion gallons into Lake Michigan. That's 40 times what they put in the BP. You talk about water, we have an example right here in Lake Michigan, and the city of Milwaukee and the sewage district haven't done a very good job of protecting it.
You need a little bit of time here to respond
Obviously,
to that.
obviously. When I came in, the capacity of the deep tunnel system was 400 million gallons. In the last 6 years, it has grown by 28%. And that's something I worked on as a member of Congress and mayor. We've increased the capacity by 28%. We actually would have doubled the capacity, but there was an opponent. There was someone who held it up. He's sitting right to my left. Scott Walker, as a county executive, slowed down the construction of a basin in Wauwatosa. If he hadn't been in the way, we would have doubled the size of this system. Now, he's also said that he understands that this is not a problem that's going to be solved overnight. He has specifically said that the way you deal with this is you separate the sewers over time. It's a $6 billion public works project that he's talking about if he's saying we should separate these sewers right now. I don't think he's saying spend $6 billion. If he is, then I want to know who's going to pay for that $6 billion, because if he doesn't like government spending, $6 billion is a lot of money. But we have addressed it. There's no question.
You think you've lived up to your promises?
Oh, there's no question. There's no question. There's no question we've lived up to the promise.
But Mike, this goes to the heart of trust. He didn't say he'd try. He didn't say he'd add. He said he would stop the dumping of raw sewage.
And we're still
period.
working on it.
You didn't stop it. 6 years later, you attacked a guy for 60 days not doing what you haven't done in 6 years. You didn't say you'd try. You said you stop it. Those basins are built. You're trying to defer the problem to somebody else. And the bottom line is when people want to know about trust, they need to look at the promises made when he ran for mayor of the city of Milwaukee and the promises he's making today. People need to look at the facts and compare the candidates.
Pam Warnke, thanks very much for your question in Wausau today. We're going to move on to Eau Claire now. Jerry Gallagher And Jerry has a topic that deals with both the environment and with state regulations. Jerry, go ahead.
Yeah, Mike, this crosses over a number of different areas. Here in Eau Claire, we talked a lot about government regulation and the impact it has on businesses in western Wisconsin, and we had a great discussion among our panelists. Unfortunately, the citizen who came up with the question tonight that we are going to raise could not be here, so I will read it for him. Here it is. The new phosphorus discharge rule is projected to cost municipalities and businesses more than $1 billion. Our group is concerned that this will drive more manufacturers out of the state of Wisconsin to states with less regulation. What is your position on this new rule? And as governor, would you try to do anything to modify it?
For people in this room, let me say this. These are sweeping rules that will go into effect next year, and they're trying to reduce the algae blooms that we see in lakes and waterways, to try and make the better water quality. So that's what we're talking about in northwestern Wisconsin. County Executive Walker.
Yeah, I was just up yesterday in Eau Claire talking about this a little bit, came up with questions not only from manufacturers, but it comes up from a lot of local officials, particularly town and municipal officials who are just scared at the overwhelming price tag they're talking about. To me, that's precisely why you've got to have a DNR secretary who's accountable to the governor, because there's got to be a balance. I want to have clean water. I want to have that not only for myself, but for my kids and future generations. But the way that the DNR did this under the current administration is out of control. It's out of control. There's no remedy to balance that cost out. There's no remedy not only to not pass that on to manufacturers, but for local governments themselves. There's got to be a balance. As governor, you bet, I would look to try and modify that so we can still protect our core natural resources in the state, water being the primary one, but at the same time do it in a way that's cost effective. That's not what the rule has done. The DNR is out of control. We got to get a handle on that, and you got to do that with a new administration that's going to clamp down and put the DNR in control on this, on wildlife management with the deer population, and a whole assortment of other issues.
Mayor Barrett.
Well, this is a rule that we will examine, and we should examine it, and we should continue to work with local governments because they are the ones that are affected by this. And as a mayor, I can tell you I am affected by these rules. And whether it's tipping fees, whether it's these phosphorus rules, I'm going to work with the local elected officials. And it's something that I've done through this campaign and worked with local elected officials because I've served at the federal level, the state level, and the local level. And I know that water literally runs downhill. And so I wanted to have the impact, the input from them. That's why I met with League of Municipalities yesterday to hear from other elected officials to see what their concerns were. That's why I met with the towns associations, because I want to hear from those officials. They know that I will respect them and work with them so that we can make sure that this is not too much of a burden on local government.
All right. Let's move on to our Milwaukee group. Kathy Michelby, my colleague, is right off my shoulder here, and she has a question from the folks in this area. Kathy?
And you touched on it earlier in your discussion with the candidates, Mike, that Milwaukee is considered the 4th poorest city in the nation. And Earl has a question that relates to that.
This is to both the candidates. What do you specifically see as causes for those statistics of, Milwaukee being the 4th poorest city in the nation? And what responsibility do you take for them?
Even in your posts now.
Begin with you, County Executive Walker.
Well, I think the biggest problem is the lack of jobs all across the state, but particularly in Milwaukee. You look in the north side of Milwaukee, the unemployment rate amongst African-American men is about 50%. That's unacceptable. To me, the best program is not another government program. It's about things that help create more jobs in the state and the private sector, put more people to work, get government out of the way, and I think that's the ultimate answer there. If we're going to bring particularly more manufacturers and other businesses, which were the lifeblood of the city of Milwaukee and this area in the past, much like they are around the state, we've got to have a plan that gets government out of the way. So the lack of jobs is obviously the primary focus. The other part that ties into that, though, is our school system. We've got to keep jobs here, to grow jobs here, we've got to put a focal point on that. To me, I think, for me, when it comes to education, and I have 2 kids of my own, I think it is a moral imperative that every kid in this state has got to have access to a great education system. Shouldn't matter what zip code they live in, every kid's got to have access. It's why I've supported reforms and saying, as running for governor, I pointed to the fact that we need to empower local school districts, particularly Milwaukee, but others across the state that have failing schools, to shut those schools down and reopen them and put principals in and staff in an emergency setting and say, we got to take control of this. We have to be stuck with all the legal restrictions of the past. We need to come in and take control. We don't need to shift it, from the school board to the mayor and go from one group that's in bed with the political machine out there and have another one out there. We've got to make sure we empower the local school district to ultimately be the one that can make those sorts of dramatic changes. That's what I support, to get the school district going so we can help empower more people to be ready for the workforce when those jobs come.
Mayor Barrett.
Well, I think we all recognize that 50 years ago what you needed to succeed in this community were two things: a strong back and a good alarm clock. Because we had a lot of good factory jobs and tannery jobs and brewery jobs and foundry jobs. But those jobs have left. First they've gone to southern states and then Mexico and to China. And that's been a real shift. That's been a real shift, and we haven't replaced them fast enough. And the people who have been disproportionately affected have been the people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale. Because let's face it, if it's cheaper to build a widget in China, it's going to be built in China. So we have to respond to that. We have this choice. We can either accept the notion that we're going to have more and more poverty and the problems that go along with it, or we're going to challenge ourselves like we've never challenged ourselves before in education. And that's what I intend to do. That's what I will continue to do. We have to make sure the kids in our schools get an education so that they can compete in a world economy. And that can't happen if you have a governor who's going to decimate education funding. It just can't happen. And so you have to make sure that you've got the ability for them to get the resources so that you can have them get the education. All you have to do, and I mentioned this before, look at Minnesota. Minnesota has a $4,000 to $5,000 per capita improvement over Wisconsin's per capita. And the reason for that is 32% of their residents have gone to college. 26% of ours have. So we have to work with students so that they understand the importance of education. But we cannot cut education like he wants to do.
Kathy?
I think Earl will say it better.
No, like seriously, like what specifically will you do to bring those jobs into the state of Wisconsin? That goes to both of you. And specifically, you know, Milwaukee and the inner city.
Well, let me tell you a story. And this is part of the M7, the Milwaukee 7. When Republic Airlines purchased Midwest, the CEO of that company said that there was going to be a decision made as to where jobs would be located. Mechanics jobs, back office jobs, and some sales reps jobs. I said, we want to be in this hunt. We want to be part of this. And so working through the M7, we put together a proposal, and it included the tax cuts tied to job creation. It included site selection and worker training. And we were in competition, a real-world competition with Denver and Indianapolis. And we ran the table. We got all 1,600 jobs. That happened because I was proactive, I was aggressive, and I was positive. And we worked through the M7. We worked together to make sure that happened. I didn't sit on the sidelines and say that it was like putting lipstick on a pig. I went in there, I rolled up my sleeves. And we have to have a governor, just like we have to have a mayor who's going to do it. Look at the Menominee Valley. 5 years ago, the Menominee Valley was a wasteland. It was the largest brownfield in this state. I went in there, worked with others. It now has thousands of jobs. Look at the Park East, just north of Bradley Center, under county control. Not a single job.
There's specific things out there, and the bottom line is we're going to aggressively promote this state, and we've talked about this plan recently. You look at businesses coming in from outside of our state's borders. I've talked about any company that wants to come in and add 50 or more jobs, I'll personally meet with them as governor. We talked about a direct hotline in the governor's office to get that initiative and turn around within 24 hours. We talked about an inventory working with local governments here and across the state of Wisconsin to identify development-ready sites, so when somebody comes in, the permitting process has already been done. We've even talked about incentives as simple as saying, if you want to come and bring your corporation in the state of Wisconsin, you're not here right now, we'll give you, my proposal is we'll give you 2 years free without paying taxes, because you're not paying them now here anyway. You know, you look at people who sell commercial or residential real estate, they do it all the time. Say, I'll give you the first 2 months free. We should do those sorts of incentives. It doesn't cost us a penny because they're not here, but it aggressively brings folks here. Now, we've done that. You know, the mayor just talked about the irony of all ironies. One of the biggest things besides the state tax incentive that was given to the airlines was the fact that the employment costs at our airport, at Mitchell International Airport, run by the county, was significantly less than the average nationally and much less than Denver. That's because we've made significant investments in our airport. We're now the fastest growing airport in America. We not only helped bring Republic in, we brought Southwest, we brought AirTran in as a hub. We've done other things like that. At the county's research park, we helped bring in GE Healthcare and over 1,000 high-paying jobs. In fact, since I've been the county executive, we've added 88 jobs at the county's research park, employing more than 3,000 people. As governor, we're going to aggressively push in every part of the state to bring more jobs to Wisconsin.
All right, Kathy, that's, I guess that's going to hold us right there. We'll move on to the next question. Thanks very much for the question from the Milwaukee group. Let's go up to Eau Claire La Crosse and Scott Hackworth. Scott has a question that deals with higher education in the state of Wisconsin. Scott, go ahead.
Well, of course, La Crosse is the home of the UW La Crosse, also Viterbo University and Western Technical College. So higher education is of a major interest here in our area and among our group. And here to pose the question is Matt Davis from Holman. Matt.
Mr. Walker and Mr. Barrett, the University of Wisconsin system has been facing cuts now for a number of years. And this is making it very hard for working families to come up with the tuition to send their kids to these schools. In addition, once the kids graduate, they're often straddled with pretty high student loans. Where does higher education sit in your priorities, and what are you going to do to fund it to make it available to Wisconsin's working families?
County Executive Walker will begin with you.
Sure. Well, first, I was just over at the UWL campus talking about this past weekend with folks, the chancellor and others I've talked about in the past, as well as many of the students. And I got to tell you, as I mentioned before, I've got two sons who are just a couple years away from going off to college. Much as K through 12 education is a priority for me because I've got a vested interest, the same thing's true as preparing for middle class as well as low-income people to be able to support and afford going to our colleges and universities in this state. To me, it's about making it a priority. And one of the best things we can do, and I've talked campus by campus about this, is the idea of giving greater autonomy to each of our individual campuses. There are things when I talk to chancellors and administrators from one part of the state to the other that they'd like to do that would get them out under the thumb of the UW system and be able to do things with procurement, with purchasing, and other things that would lower those costs. If you lower the cost, what it takes to run our colleges and universities in this state, particularly through the UW system, in the same way you help lower the cost operating our K through 12 schools, you can put more of those dollars in the classroom, and in the case of college or universities, you can help lower or at least maintain the cost of tuition so it remains affordable for all families across the state. As governor, I'm going to make that a priority.
You're going to hold it harmless? That was a question earlier about...
Well, you know, one of those, for me, it's one of the things is if there's any increases in tuition in the future, we should be looking for ways to adjust to that when it comes to financial aid. Because tuition obviously affects not only in-state residents, it affects folks from outside of the state. If tuition is going to go up, we should find ways to adjust for that when it comes to financial assistance, so those with the greatest need, middle class and lower income families, can find it affordable.
Mayor Barrett.
Well, Mike, I'm 56 years old. I have 4 kids, none of whom are in college yet, and I want them all to go to college. But I'm not going to say or do anything to try to get elected governor. I think that the problems that we face are too serious to do that. And so I'm not going to have different answers depending on which audience I talk to. I'm going to try to be as straight as I can with the people of this state. We have a very serious problem. And the problem is we have $2.7 billion in a structural deficit. And I may sound like a broken record, but when you get to the budget time, that's what you're talking about. You're talking about priorities. And there's no way that you can continue to fund higher education at the level it's being funded at right now if Scott Walker is elected governor. Because that's not his priority. He said what his priority is. His priority is having these tax cuts. And I do not think we should be raising taxes. So my answer to you is I'm going to try. But just as I said to a previous question, I can't promise to anyone that we're not going to have some changes. I cannot guarantee the status quo will remain because these issues are too important.
Can the two of you promise that taxes will not be raised to address this financial situation the state faces?
That's what I've said for my first budget.
So
yes.
that's still off. That's the one thing that is off the
off.
table for you, and that's off the
I'd
table
say
for
yes, but I'd say remember, Jim Doyle made that same promise when he first ran for governor. So think about that. Think about the policies. Think about the promises that are made. Think about the promises I talked about with the sewers district and proposing to take over the school district. You can promise anything you want. In our case, I've actually delivered on it. I made that pledge. I delivered on the pledge, not just on that, but on all the other pledges I made out there. And when but when it comes back to this issue, the bottom line is you do have to fund priorities. And that's what we've talked about. And we're talking about the same thing in front of every group out there. When I talk about our 6 points in our simple but comprehensive plan, it's the same message I give no matter what group I'm in front of.
You get about 20 seconds here for a final comment on that.
Well, I just want to say, if you're keeping score at home, Scott's mentioned Jim Doyle 6 times. He wants to be running against Jim Doyle. As I said last time we talked, you're not running against Jim Doyle.
I'm running against Jim Doyle's policies.
Yeah,
there's not a difference on any one.
There's a lot of differences, Scott. There's a lot of differences, and you got to stand up for your own record, Scott.
I'm running on my record. I'm not running away from Jim Doyle's. The fact is, we've got 2 candidates here with very different views of the future. I put my faith in the people. You put your faith in the government. That's a difference. That's great. Let's have that debate out there. That's fine.
I think the difference here, and I'll answer the question that Scott refused to answer, because one of the things that my parents taught me is to take responsibility for your own actions. The tax levy in this year's budget that Scott Walker introduced is $39 million higher than the tax levy he introduced in 2003. He will not take responsibility for that. I will take responsibility. And a lot of being a leader is taking responsibility for your actions. I would just love him to say that he takes responsibility for the fact that he proposed, not the county board, that you proposed a $39 million higher tax levy in 2010 than 2003.
And the tax levy didn't go up 1 penny in the budget I proposed. In fact, it went down by $1 million from the last year. The budget that we're in right now went up $21 million. That's the difference. The pledge I made wasn't what it was going to be 10 years ago. It was whether or not it would go up from 1 year to the next. That's the difference. If voters want to know about that, that's the promise I made.
Well, you can't let them skate on this one, Mike. You can't let them skate on this one.
Well, you want to divert attention from the fact that while you didn't make that promise, that's fine. You didn't make it. Your taxes have gone up every year.
I'm going to take responsibility. The budget I introduced today has a tax levy $45 million higher than it was in 2004. I take responsibility for that. The budget that he introduced in 2010 has a tax levy $39 million higher than the budget he introduced in 2003, and he has consistently refused to take responsibility for that. Let's talk about leadership.
I mean, if you want to have that, it's fine. I mean, the bottom line is it went up because of the county board. After my veto.
No.
Well, name a veto that I have made name a time where I've not vetoed the budget back down to zero. Every single time. I don't control the 19 members of the county board. The budgets have gone up in the city of Milwaukee, not because the Common Council of Milwaukee's added, because the mayor of Milwaukee proposed a budget that raised the tax levy from the previous year. You want to have that debate? Let's have that. I'll have that for the next 2 hours. We want to have that debate.
I think we're close to that right now, actually.
The county board has nothing to do with his executive budget. That's why I said before, that's when we're standing there naked.
If they had approved the budget I approved in 2000, or I proposed in 2003, and approved every budget then, our levy would be less than it was before I took office. Plain and simple. It'd be more than $1 million less today than it would have been in 2002 if they approved every budget I proposed.
Dan Jones has been waiting patiently over at Milwaukee Public Television. He has one of our internet questions that has been submitted. Dan, go ahead.
Mike, there are probably thousands of state employees watching this broadcast tonight because one of these guys is going to be the new big boss. So my guess is this question, which came into wispolitics.com, came from one of them. And it's for both candidates. He says, state of Wisconsin workers have already been subjected to 16 furlough days and no pay increases in this biennium. Given that the state is facing such a huge budget deficit, what could state workers expect other than just possibly contributing to their pensions in terms of their pay, their compensation under your administration?
Mayor Barrett.
Well, what I've said to the state workers is that I can't promise them, just as I've said this to every single group, I can't promise them that the status quo will remain. That I understand that we have difficulties in the city of Milwaukee. Our employees have had furloughs, and we've had a pay freeze for the last 2 years. And I did that because I wanted to preserve the services. I am not going to demonize people who work for the state government, though, because I think that they are people who are trying to support their families. But it doesn't mean that they walk free, because we all have to be part of this. And what I have proposed is having an analysis done of the pay and benefits of public employees, state employees in particular, and compare it to the private employees. Let's do a benchmark, and let's have people from the private sector, the public sector. Let's get some analysis and see what the right thing to do is. And when we do that, then we're going to make the decisions. But people have to know that we do have a $2.7 billion structural deficit. But again, I'm not going to try to demonize anybody. That's not my style. I don't try to demonize it. I'm a person who likes to solve problems. We've got a problem here. They're going to have to be part of the solution, just as every other entity in the state is going to have to be part of the solution.
County Executive Walker.
Well, and I haven't demonized anybody either. I mean, the bottom line is there's a lot of great people that work in government at all levels, just like there are people who work outside of government that are great. But we cannot have public employees continue to be the untouchables. That's why I've talked about a pension contribution that I'll start making on day one. It's why we've talked about other changes when it comes to health care and holding the line and pay increases and things like I proposed in my county budget yet again this year. Again, you cannot have that imbalance out there. And for folks who say, hey, you know, we bargained for that, I understand that. But go ask the guys at Harley-Davidson. Go ask the guys at Mercury Marine. In tough economic times, we have to do that, not only to balance the upcoming budget, but one of the biggest problems we've had under Jim Doe over the past couple budgets is the fact he just kicks the can in the future, doesn't make the tough decisions, raided the transportation fund, raided the patient compensation fund. This last go-on took $2.2 billion in federal stimulus aid, not to build roads or bridges, but to use it to balance an ongoing concern in the budget. We can't afford to do that. We've got to make changes that provide structural relief so we don't keep having this problem in the future. And when it comes to furloughs, to me, those are something you should do as a last resort. It's why we do it as a backup, but you got to be smart about it. You know, the governor did furloughs across the board, so he furloughed correctional officers and had to fill those spots time and a half again. He furloughed people in the UW system even though they got federal or non-government related funding. That doesn't make any sense to me. In the county, unlike the city where they furloughed police officers, the county, I exempted 24/7 positions like sheriff deputies, like direct patient care, other things like that where it actually cost the government money to furlough those positions. We got to be smart about how we do this with the budget.
Let me go back up to Green Bay. Tammy Elliott and the group of citizens at WFRV have a question about something that's been in the news lately. Tammy?
Thanks, Mike. In 1998, the University of Wisconsin led the way in stem cell research, and that promised new potentials for treating a multitude of medical conditions. And it has created new businesses and developed top scientific and educational talent here in Wisconsin. And now we know other states and institutions are investing substantial amounts in this area. And with our question regarding this research, I have Howard Brown of NENA representing our group. Howard?
What would you do as governor to encourage private and public investment in this field? And what would you do to prevent the brain drain of top Wisconsin scientific talent that's being recruited by other states?
Mayor Barrett, I think we begin with you this time.
Well, this is obviously an area where there's a stark difference. I support stem cell research. I support embryonic stem cell research. That's where the difference lies. I believe that this research is breathtaking in its potential. And I was in Madison recently, and I was at the Weissman Center. And I met a woman who's doing research on chromosomal damage to infants. Maybe it's even before they're born, and the impact it has on learning, particularly for little boys. And I listened to this woman, and I thought two things. I thought, this woman's a lot smarter than I am. And second, I thought, this woman's doing the Lord's work. She's using these embryonic stem cells, and she's going to improve the quality of life for these kids. I went to the next office, and there was another scientist, and he was working on an eye disease, again, using embryonic stem cells. And I thought, you're doing exactly what I would want as a parent. As a parent, if my child was suffering from this, I would want you to do that work. I have a brother-in-law who has a spinal cord injury. Earlier this week, a Wisconsin research project led to the first attempt to have a live person tested on this. This is how breathtaking this work is done here in the state of Wisconsin. Scott doesn't support that embryonic research. He says the adult stem cells are better. When this issue came up, because earlier in the campaign, Scott said, this is no longer an issue. I didn't know, I'm not a scientist. So I contacted the scientists in Madison. I said, is that right? Is this no longer an issue? And they said, of course it is. There's some work that's being done, adult stem cell work that's being done, and that's good. We both agree on that. But there's other work that's being done with embryonic stem cells, and that's good too. Politicians should not be telling these world-renowned scientists what they should do. And there's an economic component to this as well, and that was the other part of his question. And you saw that based on his comments earlier this week. When he said he was going to cut off funding for this, there was an immediate reaction from one of the scientists who's doing this work. And he said, I've got nearly $2 million in federal grants. I'll leave the state. Here it is, high-tech, biotech, cutting-edge work. He says he's pro-business. He's going to force these companies to leave this state? That's not how you lead a state forward.
Please address that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, to answer the question, I have my wife, who's here with me tonight, is a type 1 diabetic. And I actually have 2 people in my office who have got MS. So as much as anybody out there, I want to find a cure. But science has shown us, particularly over the last couple of years. Now, 4 years ago, Jim Dole used this in his political playbook. We're seeing this again. But the reality is, the major potential for cures is coming from adult stem cell research. I mean, that's just a scientific fact. It's not a political, commercial, or other issues out there. It's the scientific fact out there. And what we're talking about is putting state resources behind ethical stem cell research where there's no lack of a consensus. People understand that, they support it, there's support across the spectrum. That's where I want to put our state resources there. And when it comes to the larger issue of research and development, the University of Wisconsin-Madison alone just crossed, I think it was the $1 billion threshold this past weekend. I want to make sure on a whole spectrum of issues that we plug that in not only for higher education, but we're supportive and aggressive in moving that forward because it ties into economic development. I believe that in the larger sense. As governor, I'm going to be an advocate for that, whether it's working with Biddy Martin, the chancellor there, whether it's the new chancellor when they come at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, or working with other campuses and universities across the state of Wisconsin. We need a governor who's going to be a champion in that. But we don't need to be caught up in the political controversy of this when the science has consistently showed us the most promise for cures is in adult stem cell research.
So you would try to stop the embryonic stem cell research?
I would take the dollars that the state of Wisconsin has and put those into the area of greatest potential, which is adult stem cell research. We're not talking about banning other things. We're talking about the dollars that the state has and putting them behind the greatest potential, which science has shown us the greatest number of successes have come from adult stem cell research.
But in a questionnaire from Pro-Life Wisconsin, in which they said you answered 100% correctly, one of the questions was that you would stop
using
embryonic stem cells.
So I would stop using state dollars for that.
No, that wasn't the question. The question was, will you stop embryonic stem cell research in the state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, it says, do you support it? And as governor, the place you have control over as governor are state resources. That's what's going to come from the state next state budget. I'm going to put those resources behind the area where there's the greatest consensus and the greatest area of potential for success. We've actually seen success when it comes to adult stem cell research.
Tammy Elliott, you wanted to jump in real quickly here.
Howard would like to redirect on this.
I think there's a difference between supporting an initiative and giving it emphasis and high priority. If there hadn't been foot dragging in the last 2 or 3 years, there could have been stem cell initiatives that went well ahead, and maybe people like my wife would not have died by leukemia.
And I just have to say this. Politicians should not be dictating what world-class scientists and doctors are doing.
Final word on this.
I agree with it. That's why the dollars, we shouldn't be viewing this as a debate in politics. We should be putting it where the greatest area of potential is. The politics have shifted resource dollars. They have shifted resource dollars from adult stem cell, where the greatest potential for cures are, to embryonic because of the political nature of this debate. They should go where the greatest success rate is. That's adult stem cell research.
We're going to talk about jobs again. Let's go to Madison. Greg Jeske. Greg, something that has been talked about a fair amount in the last few months. Go ahead.
Yes, Mike, both campaigns make a lot of their support for manufacturing and manufacturing jobs here in the state. In our discussions, one thing that we learned is that innovation in manufacturing is real critical to these companies being able to expand, compete globally, and what they need to do that, of course, is money, usually in the form of venture capital for smaller businesses. A person a lot more qualified than I is going to ask our question. Mike McVicker of Baraboo is the general manager of a local manufacturing plant. Mike?
Innovation in manufacturing is what makes companies competitive in the global market, helps them grow, expand, and create opportunities. The ability for companies, especially smaller companies, to find and obtain capital for these ventures needs to be available to them. The question is this: what role do you believe government should play in facilitating the meeting of innovative businesses and venture capital?
This is sort of the new economy question. Places like Ohio are doing some interesting things along those lines. I'll begin with you, County Executive Walker.
Well, you look, there's a plan that was just put out a little bit earlier this year called Be Bold Wisconsin. It's a plan that the Competitive Wisconsin, actually the Wisconsin Counties Association, and WADA, which is the Economic Development Specialist, local government specialists from across the state, had funded this study, and they talked about a whole series of initiatives to be bold about moving the state forward. One of them include an innovation fund that would help reach out and attract to businesses that want to start, be in manufacturing and other areas. I support that. I embrace it. I came out right when it came out and said, these are the sorts of things I'd like to see done in the state of Wisconsin. I just don't think it's bold enough. I want to go beyond that. It's not enough just to have a fund. We've got to tap into more resources and make it more effective. I'll give you a good example. Part of the plans we talk about long term in the future is phasing out the state tax on retirement income. One of the biggest challenges we have for companies that want to expand, or many of those that want to start up here in this state, is the fact that there's not enough capital here. The fund will help that, but for those venture capitalists out there, one of the biggest challenges right now is because of the high tax rate we have, particularly on retirement income in the state. They're sitting down in Florida, in Arizona, in Texas, in Tennessee, and other places. We need to redirect that money back to Wisconsin, not only so we bring the retirees back, but so we ultimately can tap into those resources, invest in Wisconsin institutions that can make loans to Wisconsin companies, be it new companies, expanding companies like manufacturers and others out there. And you're not going to do that if the tax climate continues where it's at today.
Mayor Barrett.
Well, in my plan to put Wisconsin to work, we have a specific section on this. I certainly am going to put into effect a venture capital fund. We're going to seed it with $100 million. We'll do it through state bonding. We'll match it with $500 million in private funds. And the reason we'll do that is the gentleman is absolutely correct. I've been in communities throughout the state. I was in Watertown and talked to a business that was concerned about its capital and want to make sure that small businesses in particular can get access to capital, because too many banks right now, too many lending institutions aren't making these loans. And until that happens, we're going to be in trouble. And so I want us to be an active player to make sure that we can start these businesses. 98% of the businesses in this state are small employers. So we have to focus on that. My father was a small businessman. I know what it's like to go from paycheck to paycheck. And I think it's important for us to have that capital there. That's why I'm going to focus on that.
It's also why I'd take a step further and point out on the small business component. It's why not only when it comes to venture capital, on day one, literally the day I take office, January 3rd, we're going to call declare an economic emergency and call a special session in the legislature. And one of the first things we're going to do is act on tax cuts for small businesses, 50 and under, to start putting cash directly back into their hands to put more people to work.
And in 2008, he disbanded his Office of Economic Development, just filled the position 6 weeks ago.
Let me go to La Crosse. Scott Hackworth over there with our folks. It's a question about the new economy in a way too. Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, we have some private landowners in our group, and they're concerned about their rights and also promoting renewable energy options as part of the question as well. Wisconsin trails neighboring states in wind energy production due in part to tighter regulations than in other states. Rural Wisconsin landowners see wind farms as a new source of revenue and income. As governor, would you support regulations and increased incentives that would lead to more wind farms in Wisconsin?
I'm very much an advocate of wind farms, and it's important to have this balance. This is another example where you have to have the balance, because you do have, in rural areas in particular, you've got flicker issues. You've got to make sure that the landowners, the adjacent property owners are buying into this, but it is certainly part of what we can do. And Iowa and other states have been more successful, and we have got legislation in this state to allow us to move forward on this. What is important, because now it's working its way through the Public Service Commission, is to have rules that will allow adjacent landowners to be treated fairly, and I think they're striking that balance right now. And the reason I support this, and this goes to the question of renewable energy, is right now this state exports $16 billion per year for coal and oil. We don't have any coal mines, we don't have any oil wells in this state. We have to find ways to have more of that energy produced here. And whether it's wind farms, whether it's anaerobic digesters, like one I saw in Dunn County just last weekend that allows farmers to use waste and create energy from that, solar energy, traditional energy, nuclear energy, we have to find ways to make sure that we are not exporting our dollars. And I will work with the legislature on a bipartisan basis to come up with a plan for us to have more renewable energy, more energy efficiency, and more energy conservation.
County Executive Walker.
Well, we definitely have to strike a balance. And again, when we talk about our plan to create 250,000 more jobs, energy is a key part of that. We have to have cost-effective and reliable sources of power. That doesn't mean more government mandates. For us, wind energy, solar, lifting the lid on the moratorium on nuclear, clean burning coal, all those have to be components of a strong energy policy to make it cost-effective and reliable here in the state of Wisconsin. Not just for manufacturers, for farms, for others out there, but that's a key difference in this race. You know, the governor pushed forward a plan that was going to create a mandate of 25% by 2025. The mayor talked about, at least initially last year when he was on Wist Politics Luncheon, and said not only to support, he would advocate to aggressively bring that bill back up and pass it if he was elected governor in the state of Wisconsin. Well, that bill would cost us 43,000 jobs in the state. We can't afford to lose 43 jobs, let alone 43,000 jobs. That comes from that mandate that would drive up the cost of energy in the state, make it more expensive not only for our employers, but ultimately for individuals in the state. We can't afford to do that right now.
Mayor Barrett, a quick response to that.
Well, I was critical of several aspects of the bill, and the legislature addressed those aspects. I said, for example, I didn't think that California should set our emissions policies. But I'll be clear about this. I will work with the legislators to do this. Scott, this is not a priority for Scott. It's clear, it's not a priority for him. I think it's a mistake for this state to export $16 billion a year on coal and oil. It lowers our standard of living, and it's put us at a competitive disadvantage, not only domestically, but internationally.
But that's the difference. You know, I grew up in a small town, Delavan. I was an Eagle Scout there. They taught us your campsite should be cleaner when you leave it than when you found it. So I'm all for being green. But for me, being green is about saving green or making green, making it cost-effective to save money by saving the environment. You don't do it through mandate. Taking more green out of my pocket is not the answer. That's what Jim Doyle and Tom Barrett are talking about, costing us more jobs.
The big issue in this race, I think everyone at this table would agree, is jobs in Wisconsin. And we're going to go back up to Wausau, WAOW-TV, Pam Warnke and the citizen group there, because they have a question about jobs in that part of Wisconsin. Pam, go ahead.
We do, Mike. Unemployment here in the Wausau area about 11.7%, and many people have been looking for jobs for months. It's not that they're uneducated or unskilled, it's that there just are no jobs. So Ray Kalpinski is here with a question on jobs for the candidates.
Yes, Central Wisconsin has lost several sources of employment: Fiskars, Wausau Homes, paper mills. What will you do using the tools available to you as governor to promote Central Wisconsin as a desirable place to do business?
County Executive Walker, we'll start with you.
Well, first of all, do no harm. And the measure I just talked about a second ago, the bill that the governor pushed, that the mayor's supporting, the 25% mandate by 2025, would actually, one of the biggest areas it would hurt are paper mills. Obviously core to Central Wisconsin as well as the Fox Valley. So I'm not going to do any harm to that. I'm going to make it more cost effective, not less cost effective, to create jobs at the mills and other companies we have across the state. But the other part is getting government out of the way. You know, I literally was in Wausau not too long ago and talked to a company, many of you probably up there in Wausau would understand who I'm talking about, a company that makes fans, ceiling fans, and they talked about wanting to create more jobs. They're actually one of those companies that's in a position where they've got enough business, they'd like to add more jobs. The problem is they can't justify doing it in the state of Wisconsin because of the cost of doing business here. No, that's unacceptable. You know, we've got a great workforce, we've got great suppliers, great employers in this state, great natural resources, we've got all the components. What's failing us is ultimately the government. We've got to change that so that employer in the future wants to add those jobs in Wausau, in the state of Wisconsin, and not look to moving to one of the other sites outside of the state of Wisconsin.
Mayor Barrett.
Again, I think you can see the fundamental difference between our approaches. As the mayor of this city, and I'll do this for Wausau, I'll do this for Central Wisconsin, I think that the assets that Wausau, Wisconsin has in Central Wisconsin are great. I think it's a great place to raise a family. There are obviously natural resources galore. And I think we need a governor who's going to be a promoter. And Scott, all night tonight, has been saying how bad everything is. Well, I'm going to go back to this. You don't sell a house, you don't sell a car, you don't sell a dress by saying how lousy it is. And I just don't, for the life of me, understand how he thinks that he's going to be the great promoter of this state when he's out saying how bad everything is. And it's not like it's done in a vacuum, because he's done it here in Milwaukee County. He goes out, I'm out there, busted my keister, trying to meet with these companies and talking to them about doing this, and he does two things. He says it's a lousy place to do business, and then he's got a government that the business community now says is tinkering on bankruptcy. So if our leader is going to have a government after 8 years of Scott Walker leadership that's tinkering on bankruptcy, and all he says is this is a lousy place to do business, if you're a business person in Wausau, are you going to want to do business there? Of course you're not. I think you've got to roll up your sleeves and you got to get things done. That's what this is all about. Not saying how bad things are, not going around and just bad-mouthing everything.
We're running short on time. 30 seconds, please.
This is the talking points you get when you got a campaign manager from Washington who just says attack, attack, attack because you're behind. The bottom line is you look at what happened a generation ago. When Tommy Thompson first ran for governor, this state faced almost identical circumstances. We lost 178,000 jobs. We're coming off of a national recession. We had a huge budget hole, and Tony Earl and the legislators at that time raised taxes and fees. Tommy Thompson pointed that out. That's how he got in office. He said, I can do better. We can do better in this state. He took that can-do rebuild, let's move the state attitude forward, and in his first term, exactly what I'm talking about. Tackling those challenges head on, not ignoring the realities of the fiscal challenges we face in the state, but instead saying, it's the government that's failing us. It's the government. Not, you heard me in just the answer I just gave to this gentleman. I didn't badmouth the people, the employers, the suppliers. I badmouthed the government. We've got to fix the government. That's what Tommy Thompson did a generation ago. It helped us in his first term create 258,000 new jobs. Give me the chance to be your governor. I'll do the same thing and more in the next 4 years.
5 seconds. You've got a government that's failing, a government that's tinkering on bankruptcy. You're right, Scott. Government is failing. Your government is failing because it's tinkering on bankruptcy. 8 years of leadership, it's tinkering on bankruptcy.
The national bond rating agencies, the creditors, the credit report out there says strong bond rating. They wouldn't say that if they weren't significant about the fact that we have strong fiscal management here.
Let's go back over to Kathy Michaelby for a question. Kathy?
I think our group wanted to know a lot more about the person. We know a lot about the politician. We hear about so many different issues and matters during debates and also in commercials. So we have Lori Kyle here. You are a dairy farmer from Elkhorn, a mom of 2, and you have education in your heart.
This is a very direct and honest question, and actually should not cause very much of an argument. Politics aside, what life experiences or character traits prepare you to deal with the deficit, jobs, unemployment, and tax situations in our state?
We have about 1 minute for each of you on this. Mayor Barrett, we begin with you.
Well, dealing with the tough issues, I have 3 teenagers and a preteen, so that I have a very supportive wife who is with me tonight, Chris, who I'm delighted is here. And I deal with these issues at home. I balance my budget at home, and I don't have debt. And again, I think that that's an important part of this. I think it's important to have a leader who recognizes that it's more important to pay for your bills than to let the next generation pay for them.
County Executive Walker?
Actually, on that one, we'd agree. I mean, that's part of the whole reason why I've run a positive campaign running ads about the brown bag movement, talking about how growing up just down the way from you in Elkhorn and Delavan, how I learned a lot, not only from my parents, but from my grandmother who was raised during the Great Depression. And the idea of being frugal, and the fact that I still drive the same Saturn I bought back in the 90s when I was commuting back and forth in Madison, and still pack a lunch each day, which ultimately is a part of being frugal. I think those are the life experiences that are passed on to how I govern. Don't spend money you don't have. Less government is better government. And ultimately, people create jobs, not the government. Those are the things I learned growing up in Delavan with my grandmother and my parents and plenty of other people. Those are the things I'll apply as your next governor.
Lori, satisfied?
I'm satisfied.
All right, thank you.
We've just got a few minutes left, so a couple of very quick points. First question, there's not been much talk during this campaign about social issues, the culture war issues, whether it's abortion, the domestic partner benefits in this state, whether it's sexual education practices being taught in the schools. Are they relevant to this year's discussion? Scott Walker, 1 minute.
The bottom line is jobs. Tommy Thompson was a fiscal and social conservative. The bottom line is people cared at that time about what he was going to do to get the state working again. That's exactly the same thing I'm bringing forward. We're going to be aggressive in getting this state forward again. If it's not to me, it's not going to be a priority if we're not talking about what does this do to help create or grow jobs in the state or bring jobs in from elsewhere.
So not relevant this year.
The bottom line is it's about jobs. It's about the economy, what you're going to do to get this state working.
Mayor Barrett, is it relevant?
Well, it's clearly about jobs. There's no question about that. But let's be honest. I mean, there are other issues out there. I support a woman's right to choose. Scott doesn't support that, even in cases of rape, incest, or life of the mother. There's a difference there, and we both have differences there. I think that people who are in committed relationships should have legal protections, and I respect that. So I think those issues are important, but I think for most people, clearly the economic issues are important. But I'm certainly not going to do what Scott did, and that is support a district attorney who talks about prosecuting teachers for teaching age-appropriate sex education in our schools.
I'm going to give you a quick response to that.
Well, again, the bottom line, the nice talking points out of D.C., but the issue here is about
the state legislature.
Well, it's about jobs. I mean, the bottom line is we're going to talk about jobs. It's why I treated the last interview, the last debate we had about it as a job interview. I want to talk to people about the state, about the #1 issue I hear time and time again. When I was at the Altoona Family Restaurant yesterday, nobody asked me about anything else except for jobs, education, healthcare. Those are the issues people are talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
Final question. I've got about a minute left, so I'll be very brief. A judge in Clark County this week said the ban on Wisconsin's law that says it's that you can't carry a concealed weapon is unconstitutional. This thing is likely to end up in the legislature. I'd like to get your view on it. Would you support a new law that says you can carry a concealed weapon in the state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, 48 other states have that. We're one of the last 2 left. To me, it's sensible. You can do it in any other state. You have the law that Jim Doyle vetoed several times, where you require training, a background check, and a permit. It's what our neighbors in Minnesota have. It's completely worked fine. It's why the law enforcement officials all in this area, in Milwaukee, the sheriffs and sheriff deputies have supported me because they know that makes sense.
And your vote against it in the legislature was because of a different reason.
Came up in the middle of the night, came up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I said no bill that comes up at that time without public notice should be voted on no matter what it is.
30 seconds.
This is not a Second Amendment issue. I support the Second Amendment. I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I'm going to work with law enforcement on this. But I'll tell you, I don't want concealed weapons at Little League games. I don't want them at church festivals. I don't want them in shopping malls.
All right, gentlemen, we're going to hold it right there. And actually, we still could have talked for another 90 minutes. Right. But what we want to do now is wrap up our citizen groups and leave you some time for some closing statements here. So we've left you each with 1 minute Use it as you wish, and this time Mr. Walker is first and followed by Mr. Barrett. So,
well, first off, Mike, thank you to you, to the crowd, to the people all around the state. I'm running for governor because I love this state, and I believe in Wisconsin. But I believe the governor we have right now is taking us down the wrong path, and it's about time we stand up and take our government back. You know, as I mentioned, I grew up in a small town, and now I live in the largest county in the state. I got to tell you, big or small or anywhere in between, there's no place in the world better to grow up in, to live in, to work in, to play in, to raise a family, and to someday hopefully retire. And there's no place in the world better than our Wisconsin. What I've found traveling the state for about a year and a half now, applying to be your next governor, is simply this. What is failing us is not our people or our places. What is failing us is our government. And the good news is we can do something about that. On November 2nd, we the people of Wisconsin, can stand up and reclaim our rightful place in history, just like Tommy Thompson and a generation did a generation ago, as I should say. We can stand up and once and for all put the government back on the side of the people again. We can make this a Wisconsin we can believe in again. You know, the people of this state never stop believing in each other, but unfortunately we have a governor who hasn't been believing in us. We need someone to stand up and help us take our government back. You know, 8 years ago, I helped lead a grassroots movement to take back my county government, and take it back we did. Today, I stand ready to lead a similar grassroots movement to take back our state government. With your help on November 2nd, that's exactly what we're going to do. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett.
Well, thank you, Mike, and thank all of you for watching tonight and all of you for being here. I'm running for governor for 3 simple reasons. 1, to fight for jobs in the state. 2, to put Madison and state government on a diet. And 3, to provide some adult supervision in the state capitol. My roots in Wisconsin run deep. My mother was born in Sturgeon Bay, moved to Green Bay, and then went to school in Madison. My father was stationed in Oshkosh, earned the Distinguished Flying Cross in World War II, and came back to go to school in Madison. They literally met on Bascom Hill. They married, moved to Milwaukee, and that's where they raised me and my 3 siblings, and they taught us Wisconsin values. Tell the truth, fight for what you believe in, and take responsibility for your actions. These are the same rules that my wife, Chris, and I try to teach our 4 kids, the same rules that parents throughout the state try to teach. But right now, families are scared. They're concerned because of this economy. And they're concerned because they think too many politicians make promises, kick the can down the road, and then pose for the holy pictures. We need some straight talk and honest plans. That's what I've focused on tonight. That's what I'll focus on as governor. Working to create jobs, putting Madison on a diet. But this is really about you and who you trust to make the difficult decisions. We need a governor who's going to be on our side, who's going to fight for the middle class and working people. I want to be that governor. I will be that governor with your help. Please vote for me on November 2nd. Thank you.
Before we go, we want to thank the candidates for being with us tonight, and we want to thank everyone here, everyone at the remote locations around the state, and all of you at home for joining us. And finally, a special thanks to our hosts, Marquette University Law School, and our other co-sponsors tonight, Milwaukee Public Television, WisPolitics.com, and our statewide affiliates. We will be right back next week, same time, with the Town Hall Challenge and the candidates for U.S. Senate, Russ Feingold and Ron Johnson, and we hope you'll join us for that conversation. Again, thanks very much for being with us. I'm Mike Gousha. We hope you have a great evening. Good night.